예, 나는 저 가서 슈거를 난 소소한 게 신야 주로바 로제 판도지 아니면 또 제시하게.
Yesterday we looked at a few verses, and in there we looked at how others, out of various motivations, but in particular the first we looked at was out of the motivation of jealousy, that others act towards us in an unkind manner. They may speak to us in a harsh, aggressive manner, or speak badly about us. And then how to deal with that? Well, firstly, is to recognize that this person is not their afflictions. And those afflictions are dominating them right now. And therefore, they are interacting in this way. They're expressing themselves in this way. Therefore, one can, understanding that this person before you is suffering, one is able to practice patience, keep the mind undisturbed in the face of this adversity through generating love and compassion for this person. And doing so then, one has the space within to be able to respond skillfully. And also, here one can rejoice in the sign of one's ongoing spiritual development, in the success of one's meditations. Because to be able to respond in such a manner requires extensive training. It's not merely having the wish is insufficient. One needs to train one's mind so that one naturally responds in this way. And how to train one's mind is what we've been practicing here. We also looked in the afternoon at the need to engage with others in a beneficial manner, both directly and indirectly. Directly is most commonly expressed through the practices of generosity, whereby one expresses one's wish to give of oneself to be of benefit to others by either giving materially, and to give material goods, or to help those who are in grave danger, so offering of fearlessness. So this can be expressed through helping people gain access to medical treatment who otherwise could not afford it, or giving food to those who are impoverished. And thirdly is through teaching the Dharma or utilizing your own education to give advice to others and help them. So the three ways to practice generosity are the way that we directly engage in benefiting others. But together with this, we should also indirectly benefit others. And this is done through training our mind. So training our mind in all the various meditations that have been presented, such as coming to value others, cultivation of love and compassion, and so forth. So all the mental training through spiritually developing oneself, one indirectly benefits others. And this can be expressed, as we looked at yesterday, through the practice of taking and giving. So the practice of taking and giving, as explained, is where one generates the sincere wish that instead of the non-virtue that is ripening, that abides on the continuum of others, instead of it ripening in their continuum, may it ripen upon me. May beings gain freedom from suffering, and may their suffering causes they've accumulated, may it rather ripen on me. And then all the virtue that I'm accumulating through this meditation, perhaps through reciting mantra or other virtuous practices, I give it to them. May it ripen on their continuum. May they thereby come to create the causes to attain lasting happiness. So in this way, one both in meditation takes on the suffering of others and gives the resultant virtue to them. So in brief, wherever one can, we need to be of benefit to others, engaging in extensive ongoing training and thereby be of indirect benefit. And when the opportunity comes to express this training, be of direct benefit to others. The outcome of taking and giving is, as mentioned yesterday, it's not that one actually will experience the suffering results or the suffering causes ripening on one's own continuum. It's not that will actually happen, but rather one is developing a deep strength of mind that actually I have the capacity to deal with hardship. I can deal with the difficulties of life, deal with any difficulties I face, and therefore one comes to recognize one's great capacity to benefit. So what's being described here is two consecutive approaches that we need to take. One is to train in these various practices, valuing others, love, compassion, patience, and so forth. So we develop a deep familiarization with the practice. But also, we need to develop our strength of mind, our courage, our self-confidence. So these two both need to be developed. And practice of taking and giving particularly helps with developing our inner confidence, coming to recognize that I can engage with others in skillful manners and not be overwhelmed by the challenges and difficulties. So these two streams of practice, developing the various meditations and engaging in taking and giving, gives us the confidence that we can express the skill that we're developing, again, through love and compassion and so forth, to be of benefit to others. And the outcome of all this mental training, which is indirect action to benefit others, is that one will be able to directly benefit others ever more. Oneself will be happier through one's expressions of one's training. One brings happiness to others. And through one's ongoing spiritual development, one will continue in one's journey, progressing towards the attainment of full and complete enlightenment. So therefore, by training in this way, the benefit comes to oneself and others in this and lives to come. As in the verse mentioned yesterday from Shantideva's, from the 8th chapter of Shantideva's Bodhisattva's way of life, whatever happiness there is in the world has come from wanting others to be happy. Whatever suffering there is in this world has come from wanting oneself to be happy. So this points to the motivation to cultivate of cherishing others, wanting to fulfill their needs first and foremost, with the recognition that through that one also attains happiness. Yesterday, we also looked at the famous verse from the Buddha, where the Buddha says, not presenting it in a different way, but the meaning is the same, that I am a Buddha, which means I'm completely free of faults and have perfected qualities. But you, by merely respecting me, will not gain freedom from suffering. You have to train in the way that I'm guiding you. And the way that I'm guiding you is exactly the way that I myself have trained. You receiving these teachings and cultivating them within in the way I'm guiding, that is how you will gain freedom from suffering. This instruction from Buddha Shakyamuni that you have to do the work. This has been taken to heart by all spiritual practitioners throughout the millennia. So we can think back to the great practitioners that we know from ancient India, such as Nagarjuna and the other pandits. They all read and received teachings on the Buddha Sutras, reflected on them, meditated on them, and came to realize reality. So this was the case for all the great pandits, both in India, as well as those such as Tisha, who went to Tibet, and through their activities, all the great Tibetan masters for more than a millennia have been engaging in the same process as the masters in ancient India, as well as the founder Buddha engaged in, hearing teachings, reflecting on them in the way advised, and thereby transforming their way of thinking. So known tradition, that's exactly how Lama Tsongkhapa trained, as well as all the other great masters, the Nigbai Kagyu Sakya and other Gelug masters, as well as the Kadampa masters, such as Langri Tangpa, whose brief text we have been looking at here. All of them have taken this approach. So I encourage you, if you have found benefits in this and in these days together, in what has been said, if this to you at the very least intellectually makes sense, then take it to heart. Train your mind in the way that's presented here. Because what we've been looking at is, if we were to divide it into two parts, one is how to transform how we relate to others, that we come to value them, that we generate a sincere, loving and compassionate attitude towards them. And the second part comes in dependence on that. Thereby, we'll be able to deal skillfully with life's challenges. In other words, the practice of patience. And by training in the way that's been presented, repeatedly over a sustained period, transformation will come. And why can I say that with certainty? Because it's come to every great practitioner up to this point. By receiving teachings and training one's mind in the way presented, transformation will come. First talk together, I mentioned bodhicitta can be presented in two parts, conventional and ultimate. Now, in the final verse, we come to ultimate bodhicitta. With all these also untarnished by conceptual stains of the 8 worldly concerns, and through knowing all phenomena as illusory, may I liberate from the shackles of clinging. This, with all these, so this refers to all the trainings that we've looked at thus far, such as valuing others, love, compassion, and so forth. With all of them untarnished by conceptual stains. So untarnished here would refer particular to one's motivation for training one's mind, untarnished by conceptual stains of the 8 worldly concerns. So one's motivation and thereby one's training being untarnished by stains of the 8 worldly concerns. So these 8 worldly concerns refer to common concerns in the world. So they come in 4 sets of 2. So the first is attachment to gain and aversion to loss. So this refers to where it would be engaging in these practices, engaging in developing one's mind and engaging in interacting with others in the hope to receive something in return. And this often could be things such as gaining influence, gaining a good reputation, being thought of in a particular way. So one needs to try and free the mind from such concerns, in this case, gain or loss. Another is praise and scorn. So this is attachment to praise and aversion to scorn. So when interacting with others, we tend to appreciate when others show appreciation to us, when others thank us and show gratitude, or if they take us for granted, for example, then we have a sense of aversion towards them. So this thinking, this attachment to praise and aversion to scorn, this too needs to be abandoned. First of the 8 worldly concerns, attachment to gain and aversion to loss. Second is that of attachment to praise and aversion to scorn. So this is where one is attached to people talking well of you. Oh, you're so fantastic. Thank you so much. You're just wonderful. And this is fairly similar to the third set, that is attachment to fame and infamy. So attachment to fame and aversion to infamy. This is more about one's reputation, that one is generally well thought of and not wanting to be generally disliked. So praise and scorn is one set, and the other is fame and infamy, which is praise and scorn being more about one's direct interactions, and fame and infamy about one's general reputation. And then the 4th set is that of pain and pleasure, or happiness and suffering. So this is one is generally taking pleasure or displeasure in what one is doing. So these 4 sets, attachment to gain, aversion to loss, attachment to pain, attachment to pleasure, aversion to pain, attachment to praise, aversion to scorn, attachment to fame, aversion to infamy. These 8 worldly concerns, they are very commonplace, and we need to try to ensure our motivation is free from them, so that when we engage in our self-development or our beneficial activities, that we are not being guided by such worldly concerns. In whatever activity we engage in, we need to try to ensure that our motivation is free from these 8 worldly concerns, because there's really grave danger that they can ripen and that they can influence everything that we do, whether it's activities in our place of work, whether it's teaching the Dharma, whether it's being of benefit to others in some way. It's all too easily that these worldly concerns can influence our motivation. And if we take these 8, 4 of them arise from attachment, and the other 4 come from aversion, or usually come from the first 4, not those from attachment not being fulfilled. So there's attachment to gain, attachment to pleasure, attachment to praise, attachment to fame. And when these aren't fulfilled, then aversion will arise, aversion to the opposite. So why we need to try to be free of these very common motivations or these very common influences to our motivation is that these are afflictions, attachment and aversion. And they are expressed in these ways, attachment to gain, attachment to happiness, and so forth. The purpose of the Dharma is to free our mind from the afflictions. But if our motivation is influenced by the 8 worldly concerns, our relationship with the afflictions just continues. And also, in the context of the Bodhisattva training, our self-interest continues to be dominant in our motivation behind our activities. So for these 2 reasons, to break our relationship with the afflictions, as well as to lessen our self-interest, we need to be on guard against these 8 worldly concerns. Because, for example, when we engage in trying to develop a loving attitude towards others or valuing others, be compassionate towards others, with other trainings such as generosity, ethics, and so forth, it's all too easy to judge our success and take motivation from the reaction from others, whether we are being praised, whether we think we're being well thought of, whether we're receiving something in return, such as influence. We need to try and free our motivation from being influenced in that way. And again, to emphasize, these 8 worldly concerns are likely to influence everything we do, whether at our place of work or in our home or out in society. So to take a simple example, if you cook a meal for your family and you're not thanked, you're likely to have a reaction. You may well say something, you probably will, but even if it's socially inappropriate to say something, you'll notice it, you'll feel it inside. So these 8 worldly concerns are deeply embedded within us. So we need to be on constant vigilant watch against them and not let them deceive us, not let them guide us. So I encourage you to be on guard against these 8 worldly concerns, in particular because they arise from the afflictions. And it's the afflictions that are keeping us bound in suffering and from which we need to gain freedom from. With the afflictions, there are 3 primary afflictions, 3 root afflictions: attachment, anger, and ignorance. So as mentioned before, these 8 worldly concerns, they arise from attachment. And when that attachment isn't fulfilled, anger follows. And there is a sequence in the arisal of the afflictions. Anger tends to come from attachment. Attachment itself comes from ignorance. And ignorance we should understand as being ignorant of something. And in this context, it's ignorance of how things exist in reality. Can be expressed also as ignorance of self-grasping or ignorance of true grasping. So being ignorant of how things exist in reality, then other mistaken consciousnesses arise, namely attachment, and from attachment, anger can arise, and other afflictions too. And when the afflictions arise, and they are expressed through our physical or verbal behavior, this is when we create physical and verbal non-virtue, because it's from ignorance coming attachment that we may, for example, steal or deceive others, take advantage of others, or from ignorance, attachment, and then anger, and then we may shout at others, engage in verbal or physical violence. So this is the sequence, and it starts with the ignorance of true grasping. Look at the fourth line. May I liberate from the shackles of clinging. So let's talk a little bit about this from starting with shackles and then clinging, and then what liberate means. So shackles can be translated in many ways, such as being bound or chains. So we can think of a dog chained outside a house. So that dog chained outside the house, we'll all agree is not free. And why is it not free? It is bound by this chain. And and it's bound within a certain parameter. The length of the chain determines how far the dog can move or not. The chain restricts, limits that dog's movement. Clearly, that dog is not free. How does the dog become liberated or freed from this chain? It would need to be cut. If it's cut, the dog is free and will make sure it's never bound again. So this is the position we ourselves are in. The major difference is we have no idea we are chained. So what is it that is chaining us, and where is it that we are chained? So we are chained or bound by our afflictions with anger, which usually comes from attachment, and all of the afflictions come from ignorance, particularly ignorance of true grasping, or here it's called clinging. So because of these afflictions, we are chained, we are bound. And where are we bound? Not outside a house like this dog, but in samsara. It is these afflictions that bind us in samsara. And as long as we stay bound through these afflictions, we will remain bound in samsara. We will not be free. And even to the extent that we can weaken the strength of the afflictions, we still remain, even if we can weaken the afflictions, until they have been cut, and in particular, the root cause of the afflictions, ignorance, until that is cut, we remain bound. The only way to be liberated or gain freedom is to cut this chain, to break these bounds, in particular, the ignorance of true grasping or clinging. So how does one then gain liberation from the shackles of clinging? That's the third line. Through knowing all phenomena as illusory. To knowing all phenomena as illusory means coming to recognize that all phenomena, everything that exists, does not exist by way of its own inherent nature or natural existence. This is the way one comes to gain liberation from the shackles of clinging. These final two lines of this brief text, the view of Buddhism is presented. Thus far, what has been presented is conduct. So the trainings to cultivate love, compassion, bodhicitta, patience, ethics, generosity, these are all within conduct. Now we come to the view of Buddhism. And the view can be called different things: the view of reality, the wisdom realizing emptiness, wisdom realizing selflessness, the view of dependence arising. So what the view refers to is that phenomena appear to us as being true, when in actuality they are false. And this misunderstanding of that is ignorance. So what that means is the way things appear to us appears to be true or real. In other words, reality exists in the way that it appears to our mind. But in actuality, the way things appear to our mind is not how they are in reality. So therefore, this is false. It is like an illusion. And an analogy would be when one is watching a film. When you're caught up in the film, everything appears very true to you. It's only when you recognize actually these are just actors doing their thing, then you recognize, oh no, it's not really happening, but you have this whole emotional response. And this is how every single thought we have, the way it appears to us, we believe is true. This is reality, when in actuality, it is false. So it comes down to this expression: nothing exists in the way that it appears to my mind. First, give a traditional illustration or illustration from the text. If in the dark of night one sees a little before one a flaming circle of fire, one is likely to have a response to that. Perhaps fear will arise, seeing this ball of fire before you. But then you look a little closer and you recognize probably it's a child with a stick of incense, a burning stick of incense, swirling it around very quickly. And then you immediately you calm down. Your fear is pacified because you recognize, oh, it's not this ball of fire in front of me, it's just a kid playing. Or similarly, if you're sitting, perhaps you've experienced this on a train or perhaps even in a car, it seems like the platform or the trees outside are moving. How can this be? When, of course, you're just in a moving vehicle. And there's this mistaken appearance to the mind. In both of these examples, this flame, this ball of fire, or the moving trees, neither exist in the way that they appear to the mind. So this then is the meaning of nothing exists in the way that it appears to the mind. Emptiness is a difficult topic to understand and requires extensive study and reflection to understand it intellectually and then for it to have a transformative impact on your mind. But an excellent verse as a starting point is from Chandrakirti, from the third verse in the first chapter of his book, Entering into the Middle Way. Through initially clinging at a self and I, attachment arises to things as mine, turning helplessly like buckets on a waterwheel. To compassion for such migrators I prostrate. For looking at the first two lines, through initially clinging at a self and I, attachment arises to things as mine. So here, Chandrakirti presents a sequence of arisal. So he is making this statement. It's for us to check whether this is the case or not. So the first line, through initially, so this word translated as initially is literally first. So the first thing to arise is clinging at a self and I. So both words are used in the Tibetan, self or I. The meaning is the same. So initially, we cling at the self, and through clinging at the self or the I follows things being related to as mine. That's a second line. Through initially clinging at a self and I, attachment arises to things as mine. So we first cling to this self, this I, and from the sense of I, we have my body, my hands, my friends, my loved ones, my work, my responsibilities. So to have a my or a mine, it comes from having an I or clinging at an I. Again, looking at the first two lines, through initially clinging at a self and I, attachment arises to things as mine. So first there's clinging at an I or a self, or grasping at an I or a self. And from this then comes at the sense of mine, my body and my friends, my responsibilities and so forth. From this clinging then comes attachment. For example, my body has these needs, these wants. My body needs this. And then there's attachment. I want this. And from attachment and aversion can come. My body does not need this, does not want this. Or this is harming my body, and anger arises. And likewise, when we have this initial clinging at a self, follows attachment to mine, we have my family, my loved ones, my group. And then attachment, I want my group to be successful. I want all that's good for my family. That's attachment. Or aversion can come. This or that person is harming my family. This person is going against my family. And then there's aversion arising. And likewise, in terms of our responsibility, these are my responsibilities. I must have things go how I want to fulfill my responsibilities. Or that person is telling me no and getting in the way of me fulfilling my responsibilities. Aversion arises. So this is how we see this sequence. Through initially clinging at a self and I, attachment arises to things as mine. So when we recognize this cycle we are in, we see then now the third line, that we are turning helplessly like buckets on a water wheel. So we think of these water wheels, this big round wooden structure with little buckets on it, and the water stream flows underneath, causing this wheel with all the little buckets to circle. We recognize this is how we are. Through continually clinging to an I, and there's attachment for mine, all the afflictions come. And in this way, I'm creating, these are my bounds or my shackles that are keeping me bound in this water wheel or samsara. And we see how we circle from life to life to life, continuously making causes through our afflictions to be reborn and to suffer in samsara. We recognize our pitiful situation. So that's the third line, turning helplessly like buckets on a water wheel. Then we lift our gaze and recognize this isn't unique to me. All of us are in this position. And hence the plural in this in the third line, turning helplessly like buckets on a water wheel. All sentient beings are bound on this water wheel in samsara. And now the fourth line, to compassion for such migrators I prostrate. Now compassion arises in relation to oneself and all beings. And compassion, again, is defined as, may all beings be free of suffering. So here the wish arises, may myself and all beings be free of suffering. In other words, free of this process of grasping at I and mine, and thereby being bound in samsara, this water wheel of suffering. All meditation, we start at a course level, get familiar with that, and then naturally we'll start to look at it at a subtler level, a deeper level. So recognize at first, we grasp at an I, and then follows the attachment to mine. So, and again, I'll read the first two lines. The initially clinging at a self and I, attachment arises to things as mine, my body, my friends, my responsibilities, my opinions, my views. So we watch our mind and we see how our thoughts have our sense of self, I, at the very heart of everything. I am going somewhere. I am sitting here listening. I am listening. I am meditating. I am a bit hungry. I am tense. I need to relax. The heart of everything is the sense of I, and then the sequence follows from that. So we all believe that we exist. I am sitting here. This is something we will all hold to very strongly. Yes, I am sitting here. But the question isn't whether I exist or not. The question is, how do you exist? In reality, how do we each exist? This is where the mistake is. This is where we need to investigate. And when we investigate how we exist, this is where we come to recognize that the way that I appear to my consciousness is not how I exist in reality. The way that I appear is not how I exist in reality. So again, it's not the question, do I exist? Am I here or not? But it's how do I exist? It's in this how we exist where the mistake is to be found. So this is the view of the Buddha Dharma, the view of reality. And it's what is investigated by all the masters. And the presentation is according to differing views. There's the presentation of the Vibhashika, the Sautrantika, the Chittamatra, and the Madhyamaka. These various philosophical views which are there to guide one to come to recognize in reality how one exists or how all phenomena exist. So in this reflection, the point of departure is to investigate oneself. This is where one starts. How do I exist? So we identify very much with this body. But if we ask ourselves, so what in this body is a you? Where am I to be found in my body? Am I an individual part? Am I an arm? No, of course, that is just a part. What about another part like a leg? No, that's just, again, a part. What about beneath the surface of the skin? All these various organs and fluids and components. Which of those can we say, that is me? Of course, we'd all say, no, those are just parts. And what about the whole body, the composite of those parts? Well, that is still the body. It's not who I am. Sit quietly and we think to ourselves, so how does the I, the self, appear to my mind? And it appears as if it is something separate from, distinct from our aggregates, our body and mind. It appears to be something distinct from our body and mind. We sit quietly and we try to get a feel for how the self, what the self is, how it appears to us. Again, we see it as something independent of the aggregates, separate, distinct from the body and the mind. So this is how it appears to our mind, believing that this is correct, this is true, this is in reality how the self exists. This believing is the grasping or the clinging to the self as existing in the way that it appears. This is the meaning of true grasping. True means that what appears to our mind is in accordance with reality, it's true, and then we cling or grasp at it. It can also be called self-grasping, because in particular we're talking about the self or the very nature of the thing. The self appears to be independent of the body and mind, and then we grasp at it or we cling to it as existing in this way. So when we think of this verse from Chandrakirti, the very first line, through initially clinging at a self and I, this word clinging, is the clinging can be called then grasping, true grasping, or self-grasping. And when we believe that this is the case, and that the believing makes us grasp, and this is what we need to gain liberation from, this clinging. Now, in our 8th verse from Langri Tangpa, may I liberate from the shackles of clinging. So this clinging, again, is the grasping at the self as existing as something independent from the body and mind, from the aggregates. So from this true grasping, as in the text, clinging, arises attachment and anger and so forth, all the afflictions and the accumulation of karma that keeps us bound in the cycle and in cyclic existence on this waterwheel of suffering. And it's this true grasping that we need to abandon in order to attain liberation, to gain freedom. The way the self appears, the self or the I appears, is as if it's independent from the aggregates or independent from the body and mind. This needs to be investigated. Does the self then exist in the way that it appears or not? Is this appearance true? Because I grasp at this appearance as true. In other words, I believe that the self does exist in the way that it appears. So is this true or not? And this process of investigation is done via many points of analysis, and it leads to the conclusion. The self does not exist in the way that it appears. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. And this consciousness that realizes that the self is empty of existing in the way that it appears is a consciousness understanding emptiness. And this consciousness is in accordance with reality, so it's called a wisdom realizing emptiness, or it can be called the wisdom realizing selflessness. This then, by engaging in this process of investigation again and again and again, one starts to weaken, and eventually one will eradicate this ignorance, or as in our text, clinging. And in this way, we destroy our ignorance and all the resulting afflictions and accumulation of non-virtue. When we look first to see how the self appears, and we recognize that, yes, I believe this is how I exist. So this is called true grasping, because the way we believe something exists, we believe is true, and then we grasp at it or believe it. When we investigate and recognize it does not exist in the way that it appears, we know that this true grasping is an ignorance. It's contrary to reality. And our investigation that is in accordance with reality, that is a wisdom. So and now to look at our third line, when we believe that something is true, when in reality it's not, we can liken that to believing that an illusion is true, when in reality it is false, it is not true. So if we take the illustration of the swirling this ball of fire, and we believe there's a ball of fire in the sky before me, in the space before me, and then we recognize, oh no, it's not. That's not true. It's false. It's just a swirling stick of incense. This is the mistake we keep making. We believe that what is like an illusion, we believe it to be true. So when we engage in this reflection again and again, we'll see that the self does not exist in the way that it appears. It is not something independent of the body and mind. It is empty of existing in that way. Then that will lead us, this understanding of emptiness, which again, emptiness means empty of existing in the way that it appears to mind. Does not mean it's non-existent. It does not exist in the way that it appears to the mind. But the self still exists. So then how does the self exist if it's not in the way that we believe it to? And that is merely, the self merely exists dependent on labeling or imputation by mind. The way the self appears is as if it's independent of the body and mind. But the way it exists in reality is dependent. And dependent on what? Labeling or imputation by mind. As one meditates on this, the result is our afflictions weaken, because one comes to recognize that the self doesn't exist in the way that it appears. Therefore, there's no need to be attached to the self. And also other things that we think of also don't exist in the way they appear. So there's no need to be attached to them or angry when things don't go away, because nothing exists in the way that it appears. What is there to be attached to? We're just being attached to illusions, or we're angry about illusions. So in this way, all our afflictions weaken. These final two lines, through knowing all phenomena as illusory, may I liberate from the shackles of clinging. So this meditation is in brief this. Come to recognize how a phenomenon, so starting with the self, appears, which is as if it is independent of the body and mind. Then you investigate to see if it exists in the way that it appears or not. And you come to realize it does not exist in the way that it appears. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. This then is the wisdom realizing emptiness, or the wisdom realizing selflessness. And it is contrary to where we started out, which is believing that the self does exist in the way that it appears. So that believing that the self exists in the way that it appears, we now know is an ignorance, because it's not in accordance with reality. The self is empty of existing in the way that it appears. And these two, ignorance of self-grasping and the wisdom realizing selflessness, are contradictory. Ignorance and wisdom are contradictory. So as one strengthens one's familiarity with wisdom, it weakens the contrary mind of ignorance. And in this way, as one becomes ever more habituated to wisdom, our ignorance is weakened, and therefore the resulting afflictions are weakened. And eventually, that ignorance will be eliminated by the strength of wisdom. So that's a very brief summation of the process to come to understand reality. We've mentioned that there's a need to investigate whether the self exists in the way that it appears or not. So this process of investigation is a crucial part. And there are many forms or many lines of reasoning to rely on to do an effective investigation. One of which is that of dependent arising, where one uses the presentation on dependent arising to come to see if the self exists in the way that it appears. And so dependent arising can be presented in different ways, dependent on causes, mutually dependent, and so forth. But through applying this and perhaps other forms of reasoning, one comes to the conclusion the self does not exist in the way that it appears. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. This understanding of dependent arising can be applied to all phenomena. So if you think of anything that is manufactured or has been grown or produced in any way, it's very easy to understand it is a dependence arising, whether it's our natural environment, it's our possessions. Clearly, these have come about in dependence on causes. Another way to approach dependent arising is through mutual dependence, where one thing is dependent on another. So this is different from dependence on causes. So, for example, left and right. You can only talk about left in dependence on there being a right. If there's no right, how can you talk about a left? The very first step in the meditation is to see how the I, the self, appears. And this is as if it is independent of the physical, so the body, and the mental aggregates. So on a course level, we can see that there is a dependent relationship. For example, I am going somewhere. That depends on the body going somewhere, and the body going somewhere depends on the mind instructing the body to go there. Likewise, if one lies down to sleep, that is dependent. I am going to sleep depends on the mind instructing the body and one lying down. And likewise, when you wake up in the morning, that is also dependent on the mind rising from sleep into the waking state and then instructing the body, it's time to get up. So on a course level, we can understand this. And so too, in terms of our emotional state, I'm in a good mood, I'm in a bad mood, I'm feeling a little lazy, whatever it may be. That I am feeling in this way is clearly dependent on the mind. So this we can come to recognize on a coarser level. But where we really need to challenge is the sense of self that appears to be directing the body and mind. Where is that? And this is what we look for and fail to find. This fourth line, liberation from the shackles of clinging. To attain this liberation requires this meditation presented now. It is the only way to gain freedom. So all of us, we have this innate sense of a self that exists independent of the body and mind, some kind of controller of the body and mind. So this is something innate to us. We all have this. And this is the ignorance of self-grasping, or the ignorance of true grasping. And this is what we need to investigate to see whether this is an ignorance, as we are told, or whether, no, actually, in reality, this is how the self exists. The self does exist in the way that it appears. And when we investigate, we'll repeatedly come to see no such self can be found. Therefore, it is empty of existing in the way that it appears. And this is the wisdom understanding emptiness. And as we cultivate it ever further, it will eventually be of sufficient strength to completely destroy ignorance. But for that to come about requires extensive hearing or studying and reflection on what one is studying, as well as an extensive accumulation of merit. So for that, again, in the fourth line, we see, may I liberate from the shackles of clinging. There we're making supplications to our lama, to our yidam, to the three jewels, and so forth, so as to create merit, to enable or to power our reflections based on our study. This is the way that one comes to eventually gain liberation from the shackles of clinging. For these final two lines, through knowing all phenomena as illusory, may I liberate from the shackles of clinging. The entire meaning of the Madhyamaka philosophy is presented. So now, to summarize what we've looked at over these days together, started out by mentioning how at a fundamental level, we all desire happiness. No one wants to suffer or have problems or difficulties. This fundamental level, we are all the same. And whilst we chase around after attaining temporary pleasures and overcoming this life's problems, what we really want, what we really yearn for, is lasting, stable happiness, a happiness we have yet to experience. But such attainment of such happiness is entirely possible for everyone. We all have the capacity to attain lasting, stable happiness. What is required is to apply oneself to the proven technique or method to achieve it. And that is just radically transforming our way of thinking. What we've been primarily speaking about in these few days together is how to transform our way of thinking. And in the very first verse, we spoke about how to recognize our interdependence with others, to come to truly appreciate our connection with others and to value others, and have that as a foundation upon which to develop love and compassion. Love being the wish, may all beings attain lasting, stable happiness. And compassion being the wish, may beings be free of all forms of suffering, be free of being bound in this, or shackled in this prison of samsara. And from love and develop, we've also spoken about the need to develop love and compassion further, to the point where whilst our mind is deeply loving and compassionate, we are no longer satisfied just with having a loving, compassionate attitude to others. We want to make this reality happen. In other words, that beings attain freedom from suffering and abide in lasting happiness. And thereby, we generate the determination, I will become a Buddha, the most skilled of guides, so that I can guide beings to gain freedom from suffering and attain lasting happiness. And this is the generation of bodhicitta. And with the mind of bodhicitta alone, this determined attitude to become a Buddha for the sake of others, one then needs to engage in various trainings of the mind so as to make that a reality. And these start with the training of generosity. And there we spoke about the three types: material generosity, giving of fearlessness, and giving the Dharma. So these are one needs to train in this direct means to benefit others. And the various indirect means that of ethical restraint, where one restrains one's body and speech, and particularly one's mind, within the bounds of what is ethical. And then the third training we spoke about a lot, that of patience, a mind staying undisturbed in the face of adversity. And the fourth is that of joyous perseverance, where one takes delight in virtue. Engaging in these trainings, being virtuous, is not a burden. It's not something that one should do, but one takes delight in because of understanding the great benefits. And then we haven't spoken about it, but the fifth training is that of single-pointed concentration, developing a mind that is undistracted, that is focused on virtue. And then the final training is the wisdom realizing emptiness, which is what we've spoken about now in this session. So these are the trainings that all beings need to engage in order to break free from these shackles, to destroy these shackles that bind us in this prison of samsara, and gain liberation from suffering, and be able to guide others to gain such liberation too. And the teachings that we cover here on the weekends, those are the lamrim, on the Wednesday nights, those of engaging in the Bodhisattva's way of life. All of those teachings come down to what is presented here, the method by which one gains liberation from suffering. And engaging in this method, cultivating these ways of thinking, radically transforming our mind, is something we all need to engage in. This is the focus of my life, and I encourage all of you too to engage in these trainings, to develop this way of thinking within yourself, and thereby, through engaging in this process of radical transformation, you'll suffer less, you'll experience ever more happiness in these days together. All of us, each and every one of us, have accumulated so much merit, so much virtue. And whilst this is invisible, we cannot point to it. These virtuous minds that we have been cultivating in our time together, through hearing teachings, engaging in reflections, and so forth, this has produced a lot of virtuous ways of thinking, all this merit. Now we come to dedicate that merit. To have been able to accumulate merit like we have over these days, this requires extensive causes and conditions. Without such causes and conditions, we are unable to create merit, certainly not like this. So there's a combination of causes which all have to be accumulated, both those which are outer as well as those which are inner. Outer causes include that this Dharma center exists, And for this Dharma center to exist comes about independence on so many causes. There are those who help keep it alive and vibrant now through their various endeavors here, as well as those who over the previous decades have contributed to the Dharma center. So all of these causes, both those that are seen now, as well as those in years gone by, are required for this Dharma center to exist, and thereby for all of us to gather together here. But for us to gather together here doesn't only require extensive outer conditions, but also inner conditions. There has to be there has to be the wish to come here, the wish, the appreciation for what a course such as this can present to you, the benefits that can follow. So there are these various inner conditions that each of us require to come here. This very wish to fulfill our human capacity. And moreover, we should also reflect on our interdependent connection. That you could come here was dependent on your inner conditions, the various outer conditions, and that there was someone who could share some knowledge about this text. And that, from my perspective, that I could share what I understand of this text with you is dependent on each of you. Without students, who am I going to talk to? So we have this interdependent relationship. We are not independent, solo islands doing our own thing, but we are deeply entwined. So therefore, the virtue that each of us have accumulated, myself and everyone here, is dependent on each other. So we recognize this interdependent relationship, this connection that we have. And when we come to dedicate, we also dedicate that we continue in our journey of spiritual development, and we continue to interact together, lifetime to lifetime, growing and developing and progressing towards the attainment of lasting happiness. And by knowing that we are supported by a community, that we are not alone in these endeavors, recognizing this deeply serves to strengthen us, knowing that we have companions, that we have those who are helping us move forward. When we dedicate all this virtue so that these good qualities, these excellent qualities that we have spoken about here, in particular those of love, compassion, and wisdom, that they grow and flourish within all beings, ourselves and all beings. And they grow and flourish to the point of perfection, so that all beings arise as perfected beings, as Buddhas. And in this way, and throughout this journey from this present moment to the point when all beings arise as Buddhas, may beings not suffer. May they not suffer through conflict, whether inner turmoil or the expression of that, so conflict in the home, conflict between communities or between nations. May that be pacified. May beings not suffer through physical ailments such as illness. May all beings abide in lasting happiness. So then, thank you. We can conclude there now. Thank you.